Part 1. The Influence Awakening. Hey, my friend, listen, I'm going to be straight with you right now. There are people walking around who seem to get everything they want. Everything. They walk into rooms and people lean forward. They speak and conversations shift. They suggest something and suddenly everyone's nodding like it was their idea all along. And here's the part that might sting. It's not because they're smarter than you. It's not because they're more talented. It's not even because they work harder. It's because they understand something most people never figure out. I know this because I used to be on the outside looking in. I used to watch these people, frustrated, confused, maybe even a little bitter. I'd prepare better arguments, bring better data, work longer hours. And still, someone else would waltz in with half my preparation and walk out with everything I wanted. The promotion, the client, the yes when I got a maybe. And then something shifted. I stopped asking, why them? And started asking, how? How do certain people make influence look effortless? How do they turn strangers into advocates? How do they navigate resistance like it's not even there? What I discovered changed everything. And I mean everything. Here's what nobody tells you about influence. It's not a gift you're born with. It's not some mystical talent that descends on the chosen few. It's a skill, a learnable, practicable, masterable skill. Just like learning to drive or speak a new language or play an instrument. The difference is that nobody teaches it properly. We stumble through life trying to figure it out through trial and error, making the same mistakes over and over, wondering why our words don't land the way we want them to. But what if you could skip all that? What if you could compress years of trial and error into focused understanding? What if you could walk into any situation knowing exactly which psychological levers to pull, which emotional notes to strike, which words to use? That's what we're doing here together. Right now, you're standing at a threshold. On one side is the old way of communicating, the endless cycle of hoping people will just understand you, of watching opportunities slip away because you couldn't quite get your point across. On the other side is something different, a version of you who knows how to guide conversations, who understands what makes people say yes, who can create genuine connection while achieving your goals. And I'm going to share something that might surprise you. This isn't about manipulation. It's not about tricking people or playing mind games. The most powerful influencers I've ever met aren't con artists. They're people who genuinely care about creating value while understanding how human psychology actually works. They've learned to align their communication with the way people naturally make decisions. And that alignment, that's where the magic happens. Think about your life right now. How many times this week have you wanted to influence an outcome? Maybe you needed your team to buy into a new idea. Maybe you were trying to resolve a disagreement with your partner. Maybe you wanted to inspire your kids to make better choices. Maybe you were pitching to a potential client or trying to get a fair deal on something important. Every single day we're engaged in countless moments of influence. Most of them we don't even recognize as persuasion. We're just trying to get things done, to be understood, to move things forward. But here's the thing. Some people are doing it unconsciously well, and most of us are doing it unconsciously poorly. The difference isn't intelligence. It's not charisma. It's understanding. Let me paint you a picture of what's possible. Imagine walking into a tense meeting where people are divided, opinions are hardened, and the atmosphere is thick with resistance. Instead of feeling that familiar anxiety in your chest, you feel calm, confident, because you know exactly how to read the room, how to address the underlying concerns before they become objections, how to reframe the conversation so that people start seeing possibilities instead of problems. Or picture this. You're having a difficult conversation with someone you care about. In the past, these talks would spiral into arguments or awkward silences. But now, you understand how to create safety, how to validate without agreeing, how to guide the conversation toward mutual understanding. The relationship doesn't just survive these moments anymore. It actually grows stronger through them. That's not fantasy. That's what happens when you truly understand influence. Now, I want to be honest with you about something important. This isn't going to be one of those things where you read a few tips and suddenly transform overnight. Real mastery takes time. It takes practice. It takes being willing to experiment, to fail, to adjust, to grow. But here's what I can promise you. Even small improvements in your ability to influence will create ripple effects across your entire life. When you finish working through what we're going to cover together, you'll have a completely different lens through which you see human interaction. You'll start noticing patterns you never saw before. You'll recognize the subtle influence happening all around you, the psychological triggers being activated, the emotional dynamics at play. And more importantly, you'll know how to use these insights ethically and effectively in your own communication. The first time you read through this material, you're going to gain a solid foundation. You'll understand the core principles of how influence actually works. You'll be able to identify different types of persuasion in action. You'll start seeing opportunities for strategic communication that you never noticed before. But the real transformation, that comes from application. From taking these concepts and testing them in real conversations, from paying attention to what works and what doesn't, from developing what I call influence intelligence, this ability to read situations and adapt your approach in real time. Over time, something remarkable happens. These techniques stop being techniques. They become second nature. You'll find yourself naturally framing things in more compelling ways. You'll automatically adjust your communication style to match your audience. You'll intuitively know when to push and when to pull back, when to use logic and when to appeal to emotion, when to assert and when to listen. And here's where it gets really interesting. People will start describing you differently. They'll say you're a natural communicator. They'll talk about your leadership presence. They'll mention how persuasive you are, how you always seem to know the right thing to say. They won't realize that what looks effortless to them is actually the result of deliberate practice and deep understanding. So what's involved in this transformation? What are the essential elements you need to master? First, you need to understand the fundamental types of influence. There are 5 distinct pathways to changing someone's mind, and each one works differently. Some people respond to authority. Others need to see expertise. Some are moved by relationships and trust. Others respond to clear incentives. And yes, sometimes people respond to the perceived consequences of not complying, though that's typically the least sustainable form of influence. The key isn't to pick one and stick with it. The key is to recognize which type is most appropriate for each situation and to seamlessly blend them when needed. The master influencer moves fluidly between these different modes, reading the situation and adjusting accordingly. Second, you need to develop what I call strategic awareness. This is the ability to see every interaction as an opportunity for influence, not in a manipulative way, but in a conscious, intentional way. Most people sleepwalk through their conversations, saying whatever comes to mind without thinking about the impact. Strategic awareness means you're always thinking 1 or 2 steps ahead, always considering how your words are landing, always adjusting based on feedback. Third, you need to build your confidence. And I don't mean fake it till you make it confidence. I mean the deep, grounded confidence that comes from really knowing your stuff. When you understand these principles inside and out, when you've practiced them enough to see them work, something shifts in how you carry yourself. People sense that confidence, and it makes them more receptive to your influence. Fourth, and this might be the most important, you need to develop adaptability. Cookie-cutter approaches don't work in real human interaction. What persuades one person might completely turn off another. What works in one context might fail miserably in another. The ability to read the situation, understand your audience, and adjust your approach accordingly. That's where true mastery lives. Now, you might be wondering why we're starting here with this big picture view instead of jumping straight into specific techniques. There's a reason for that. Most books on persuasion throw tactics at you without giving you the framework to understand why they work or when to use them. It's like teaching someone chess moves without explaining the strategy behind them. You might win a few games through memorization, but you'll never become a true player. By starting with this foundation, with this understanding of what influence really is and how it works, we're building something much more powerful. We're creating a framework that will allow you to generate your own strategies, to adapt to situations we haven't even discussed, to continue growing long after you finished reading this. Think of it like learning a language. You could memorize a bunch of useful phrases and get by as a tourist. Or you could learn the grammar, the structure, the underlying patterns of how the language works and actually become fluent. That's what we're doing here. We're going for fluency. And here's something crucial I need you to understand. Influence isn't about winning. It's not about dominating or defeating or getting your way at someone else's expense. The most powerful form of influence creates win-win outcomes. It finds ways to align your goals with other people's needs and desires. It makes people feel valued and heard even as you're guiding the conversation toward your desired outcome. This is why understanding beats memorizing. When you truly understand how influence works, you can create these aligned outcomes naturally. You can be genuinely focused on helping people while also achieving your objectives. There's no contradiction there. In fact, the best influencers are often the most helpful people because they've learned to see influence as a tool for creating value, not just extracting it. Let me share something with you that most people never realize. Every single day, you're already being influenced in countless ways. The way products are arranged in stores, the way news is framed, the way your colleagues phrase their requests, the way social media platforms are designed. Understanding influence isn't just about becoming more persuasive. It's also about becoming more aware, more resistant to manipulation, more intentional about the influences you allow into your life. When you understand these principles, you start seeing the matrix. You notice when someone's using scarcity to rush your decision. You catch yourself falling for social proof. You recognize when your emotions are being targeted. This awareness is incredibly empowering. It means you make better decisions. You're less likely to be swayed by manipulative tactics. You choose your yeses and nos more deliberately. So, as we move forward together, I want you to think about what success looks like for you. Maybe it's finally getting that project approved that you've been pushing for months. Maybe it's improving your relationships with difficult people in your life. Maybe it's becoming the kind of leader who inspires rather than instructs. Maybe it's building a business where people genuinely want to work with you. Whatever your goals are, influence is the pathway. Because here's the truth. Almost nothing meaningful in life gets accomplished alone. Everything requires other people, collaboration, cooperation, agreement, support. And the better you are at securing those things, the more you'll be able to achieve. But here's what I love most about mastering influence. It doesn't just help you achieve your goals. It transforms the journey. Communication becomes more enjoyable. Relationships deepen. Conflicts resolve more smoothly. You feel more connected, more understood, more effective in the world. And it starts right now with a simple shift in mindset. Stop thinking of persuasion as something sleazy or manipulative. Start seeing it as an essential life skill, as fundamental as reading or writing or basic math. Because in a world built on human connection and cooperation, the ability to influence is the ability to thrive. In the next section, we're going to dive into something fascinating: how the environment around you shapes persuasion in ways you probably never considered. We're going to explore how the setting, the atmosphere, even the physical arrangement of space can dramatically impact how receptive people are to your ideas. But before we go there, I want you to reflect on something. Think about a recent situation where you wanted to influence someone and it didn't go the way you hoped. Got one in mind? Good. Hold on to that, because by the time we're done, you're going to understand exactly why it didn't work and what you could have done differently. You're about to see human interaction in a completely new way. The invisible dynamics that shape every conversation. The hidden patterns that determine whether people say yes or no. The subtle forces that either amplify or undermine your influence. Are you ready for that? Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And honestly, that's the whole point. Let me tell you about something that happened to me at a co-working space last summer. I was trying to convince a potential collaborator to join forces on a project I was passionate about. I had all my arguments lined up, all my data ready, all my enthusiasm dialed up. We grabbed coffees and sat down in the main area right in the middle of all the activity. And the conversation went nowhere People were walking past constantly. Music was playing. Someone's phone kept ringing. My potential partner seemed distracted, non-committal, eager to wrap things up. I walked away frustrated, convinced the project just wasn't compelling enough. 2 weeks later, I ran into the same person at a quiet rooftop terrace during an early morning meetup. We started talking casually, and I mentioned the project again, almost as an afterthought. Within 10 minutes, they were all in. Same project, same person, same me. What changed? Everything and nothing. The idea hadn't changed. My ability to articulate it hadn't suddenly improved. What changed was the environment, and that change made all the difference. This is what most people miss about influence. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. The setting, the atmosphere, the physical and emotional environment you create, these aren't just background details. They're active participants in the persuasion process. Think about the last time someone convinced you of something important. Where were you? What was the setting like? How did you feel in that space? Chances are the environment played a bigger role than you realized. We humans like to think we're rational beings who make decisions based purely on logic and information. But the reality? We're deeply influenced by context. The temperature of a room can affect how warmly we feel toward an idea. The comfort of a chair can impact how long we're willing to engage in difficult conversations. Even the color of the walls can subtly shift our mood and receptivity. This isn't manipulation. It's understanding. It's recognizing that human beings are holistic creatures. We don't process information separate from our sensory experience. Everything blends together: our thoughts, our feelings, our physical sensations, our environment, into the moment of decision. So when I talk about setting the stage for influence, I'm talking about being intentional about all of it, creating an environment that supports your persuasive goals rather than undermining them. Let me give you a framework for thinking about this. Imagine your mind is constantly scanning your environment for signals about safety, about status, about whether this is a good time to be open to new ideas or whether you should be cautious and defensive. Most of this scanning happens below conscious awareness. You're not thinking, this room is cold and uncomfortable, therefore I should be skeptical of whatever this person is about to propose. But unconsciously, that's exactly what's happening. When you control the environment, you're essentially controlling those unconscious signals. You're creating conditions that tell someone's brain, you're safe here. You can relax, you can be open, you can trust. Now, I know what you might be thinking. I don't always have control over the environment. What about phone calls? What about situations where I'm walking into someone else's space? Great question. And you're right. You won't always have full control. But you'd be surprised how much influence you can exert even in situations that seem fixed. Can't control the location? You can still suggest meeting at a neutral place rather than their turf or yours. Can't change the physical space? You can still adjust your positioning within it. Stuck on a phone call? You can use your voice, your pacing, your energy to create an auditory environment that's conducive to persuasion. The key is to think strategically about whatever elements you can influence and to use them intentionally. Let's talk about some specific environmental factors and how they impact persuasion. Physical comfort matters more than you think. When people are physically comfortable, they're more mentally flexible. They're more willing to consider new ideas. They're less defensive. This is why important negotiations often happen over meals or in comfortable lounges rather than sterile conference rooms. The physical ease translates into psychological ease. If you're trying to influence someone, consider, are they comfortable? Are they too hot or too cold? Is the seating arrangement awkward? These might seem like trivial details, but they're creating friction that works against you. Noise levels shape receptivity. There's a sweet spot for ambient noise. Too quiet, and conversations feel overly formal, even tense. Too loud, and people can't focus. They feel stressed and rushed. Moderate background noise, like the gentle hum of a cafe, actually enhances creative thinking and openness to new ideas. This is why some of the best persuasive conversations happen in places with just the right amount of ambient activity. Not silent, not chaotic, just alive enough to feel comfortable. Space and proximity create dynamics. Where you position yourself relative to someone else sends powerful signals. Sitting directly across from someone can feel confrontational, like you're on opposite sides. Sitting at a right angle feels more collaborative. Standing while someone else sits creates an uncomfortable power dynamic. Pay attention to spatial arrangements. If you're trying to build alliance, don't create physical arrangements that suggest opposition. Lighting affects mood and energy. Harsh fluorescent lighting can make people feel drained and skeptical. Warm, natural lighting makes people feel more positive and open. If you have any control over lighting in your persuasive environment, use it. And if you don't, at least be aware of how the existing lighting might be affecting the interaction. Scent is an underrated influence tool. Our sense of smell is directly linked to the emotional centers of our brain. Pleasant scents can create positive associations and lower defenses. This doesn't mean you should douse yourself in cologne, but it does mean that environments that smell clean and pleasant have an advantage over those that smell stale or unpleasant. Now, all of this environmental awareness is just the beginning. There's an even more fascinating dimension to setting the stage for influence: priming. Priming is this incredible psychological phenomenon where exposure to one stimulus influences response to another stimulus. Let me make that concrete with an example. If I show you the word yellow and then ask you to name a fruit, you're more likely to say banana than if I hadn't shown you that word first. Your brain got primed. The concept of yellow was activated, making yellow fruits more accessible in your mind. This happens constantly in persuasion, often without us realizing it. Smart influencers use priming intentionally to prepare people's minds for the ideas they're about to present. Let's say you're trying to persuade someone to invest in innovation. Before you even make your pitch, you might casually mention a news story about companies that failed because they didn't innovate. Or you might reference a successful innovator they admire. You're priming their mind to think about innovation in certain ways before you even ask for what you want. The beautiful thing about priming is that it works subtly. People don't feel like they're being influenced. They just find themselves more receptive to your ideas because their mind has been prepared for them. Here's how you can use priming practically. Content priming. Before important conversations, share articles, stories, or examples that relate to the concepts you'll be discussing. You're not making your argument yet. You're just getting those ideas into their awareness. Emotional priming. If you need someone to feel optimistic about a risky proposal, spend the first part of your conversation focusing on recent wins and positive developments. You're priming an optimistic, emotional state. Value priming. If you're going to ask someone to make a decision based on long-term thinking, start by discussing other contexts where long-term thinking paid off. You're activating that value framework before you need it. The key to effective priming is subtlety. If it feels forced or obvious, it loses its power. The best priming feels like natural conversation, like you're just sharing interesting thoughts before getting to the main point. But environmental influence goes beyond what people consciously see and hear. Your nonverbal communication is constantly shaping the environment you create. Your body language, your facial expressions, your energy level, all of these are environmental factors that influence how people receive your message. And here's the fascinating part. These nonverbal cues often carry more weight than your actual words. Think about it. If someone says, "I'm excited about this opportunity," while slouching with their arms crossed and a flat expression, what do you believe? The words or the body language? You believe the body language every time because it's harder to fake, it's processed more instinctively, and it's more trustworthy. This means that if you want to create an environment conducive to persuasion, you need to be aware of what your body is communicating. Open posture signals openness. Uncrossed arms, facing toward the person, leaning in slightly. These all communicate that you're engaged, receptive, non-threatening. They invite the same from others. Eye contact builds connection. Not staring, not avoiding, just natural, comfortable eye contact tells people you're present, you're genuine, you're worth listening to. Matching energy creates rapport. If someone's speaking quietly and thoughtfully, and you come in loud and rapid fire, there's a mismatch that creates discomfort. Subtly matching someone's energy level, their speaking pace, even their breathing rhythm, creates unconscious rapport. Confident movement inspires confidence. If you move with assurance, speak with certainty, gesture with purpose, people unconsciously absorb that confidence. They feel like they're in good hands. Now, I want to emphasize something important. None of this is about being fake. It's about being intentional. You can be authentically yourself while also being strategic about how you show up. In fact, the most effective influencers I know are deeply authentic. They've just learned to channel their authenticity in ways that support their goals rather than undermine them. There's one more element of environmental influence I want to touch on: social proof within the environment itself. When you're trying to influence someone, one of the most powerful environmental factors is evidence that others have already been influenced. This could be testimonials on the wall, photos of satisfied clients, mentions of other people who've embraced what you're proposing. But it can also be more subtle. If you're trying to convince your team to adopt a new process, having one or two early adopters present in the conversation creates an environment where the change feels more inevitable, more normal. Social proof doesn't just live in what you say. It lives in the environment you create. All right, let's bring this all together with some practical application. Next time you have an important persuasive conversation coming up, don't just think about what you're going to say. Think about the stage you're setting. Ask yourself, where will this conversation happen? Can I choose a location that's comfortable, appropriate, and conducive to openness? What will the physical environment be like? Can I control elements like seating, temperature, noise level? How can I prime their thinking before we even start the main conversation? What does my nonverbal communication need to convey? Am I showing up in a way that supports my message? Is there social proof I can weave into the environment? These might seem like small details, but small details compound. They create a cumulative effect that can mean the difference between resistance and receptivity. And here's something I've learned through years of practice. When you get the environment right, persuasion becomes easier. It's like the difference between swimming upstream and swimming with the current. The destination might be the same, but one requires way less effort. So start small. Pick one environmental factor to focus on in your next persuasive conversation. Maybe it's choosing a better location. Maybe it's being more intentional with your body language. Maybe it's finding a subtle way to prime their thinking. Try it. Observe what happens. Adjust. Try again. Because mastering environmental influence isn't about perfection. It's about awareness and intentionality. It's about recognizing that persuasion is a holistic experience, not just an exchange of words. As we move forward, you're going to see how everything we've talked about, the types of influence, the strategic mindset, the environmental factors, all of it comes together when we dive into the psychological triggers that drive human decision-making. But we'll save that for next time. For now, I want you to start noticing. Notice the environments where you feel most receptive. Notice how different settings affect your mood, your openness, your willingness to engage with new ideas. Because once you start seeing it in your own experience, you'll never miss it in your persuasive efforts again. Part 2. The Psychology of Yes. You know what's wild. Right now, as you're reading this, your brain is making thousands of tiny decisions you're not even aware of. Whether to keep reading or check your phone. Whether to trust what I'm saying or be skeptical. Whether this information feels relevant or feels like noise. And here's the really interesting part. Most of those decisions aren't being made by the rational, logical part of your brain. They're being made by ancient circuits, evolutionary shortcuts, psychological patterns that developed over millions of years to help humans survive in a very different world than the one we live in now. These patterns, these mental shortcuts, they're what we call psychological triggers. And understanding them, that's like getting the cheat codes to human decision-making. Now, before you start thinking this sounds manipulative, let me be clear about something. These triggers are already running the show. They're already influencing every decision you and everyone around you makes. The question isn't whether they're being used. The question is whether you're going to understand them well enough to use them ethically and effectively, or whether you're going to keep stumbling through conversations wondering why your perfectly logical arguments keep falling flat. I learned this lesson the hard way. A few years back, I was trying to get buy-in from my team on a major process change. I had data, I had logic, I had a presentation with charts and graphs and ROI calculations. I spent hours preparing, and when I presented it, you know what I got? Polite nods, vague agreement, and then absolutely nothing changed. I was furious. How could they not see how much better this would be? How could they ignore the evidence right in front of them? Then I had coffee with a mentor who asked me one simple question. Did you give them a reason to care or just a reason to agree? That question changed everything for me. See, I'd been operating under this assumption that people make decisions based on facts and logic. That if you present a strong enough case, rational people will rationally agree. But that's not how humans work. We're not computers processing inputs and outputs. We're emotional creatures who use logic to justify decisions we've already made on a gut level. Once I understood that, once I stopped fighting against human nature and started working with it, everything shifted. So let's dive into how this actually works. Let's talk about the psychological triggers that really drive behavior. The first one is reciprocity, and it's probably the most powerful influence tool you'll ever use. Here's the basic principle. When someone does something for us, we feel an almost overwhelming urge to do something for them. It's hardwired into us as social creatures. We don't like feeling indebted. We don't like the psychological tension of owing someone something. But here's where it gets interesting. The trigger doesn't just activate when someone does something big for us. Even tiny favors create this sense of obligation. Let me give you a real example from my life. I was at a networking event last year trying to connect with someone who could open doors for a project I was working on. Instead of immediately pitching what I wanted, I spent 15 minutes genuinely helping them solve a problem they mentioned. Just listening, asking good questions, sharing a relevant contact. I didn't ask for anything that day, just helped and moved on. 2 weeks later, I reached out about my project. They not only took the meeting, they actively championed what I was doing. Was it because my project was so amazing? Maybe partially. But the reciprocity trigger played a huge role. I'd given first with no strings attached, and that created a psychological opening. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Isn't that manipulative? Using kindness as a strategy? And here's my answer. It's only manipulative if you're being fake. If you're genuinely helping people, genuinely adding value, and then at some point asking for something in return. That's just how healthy human relationships work. We help each other. We support each other. We create networks of mutual benefit. The manipulation comes in when you fake helpfulness just to create obligation. Don't do that. People can smell inauthenticity from a mile away. But do understand that when you consistently add value to people's lives, you're building up reciprocity capital. And that capital becomes incredibly valuable when you need support, when you need buy-in, when you need someone to take a chance on you. Here's how to use reciprocity effectively. Give first, without expectation. Help people, share knowledge, make connections, offer value. Don't keep score. Don't make it transactional. Just be genuinely useful. Make your giving visible. This doesn't mean bragging. It means making sure people actually notice when you've helped them. Sometimes people miss it. A simple, "Hey, I sent you that contact info we talked about. Make sure they register the help. Give in ways that matter to them. Not all favors are created equal. Spending 5 minutes making an introduction that could change someone's career is worth way more than spending an hour on something they don't really need. Pay attention to what people actually value. Time your asks strategically. After you've established a pattern of giving, when you do ask for something, you're drawing on reciprocity reserves. But don't drain the account. Keep the balance positive. The second major trigger is scarcity, and it's working on you right now whether you realize it or not. Think about the last time you bought something because there were only 3 left in stock, or rushed a decision because an offer was ending tonight, or wanted something more because you learned not everyone could have it. That's scarcity at work. Here's what happens psychologically. When something becomes scarce, when availability is limited, our brain interprets that as a signal of value. If everyone wants it and there's not enough to go round, it must be worth wanting. And beyond that, we hate the feeling of missing out. We'd rather have something we don't really need than experience the regret of not having it when we wanted it. This trigger is everywhere in marketing. Limited time offers, exclusive access, while supplies last. But it works just as powerfully in everyday influence. I used this recently when trying to get commitment from a potential business partner. Instead of being available whenever, instead of seeming eager and flexible, I was honest about my constraints. I'm only taking on 2 new partnerships this quarter, and I've got 1 other conversation happening right now. Was that manipulative? No. It was true, but it also activated scarcity. Suddenly, the decision wasn't, should I partner with this person or not? It became, do I want to be one of the 2, or do I want to risk missing out? The partnership happened. Now, here's the ethical line with scarcity. It has to be real. Fake scarcity is not just manipulative, it's also ineffective because people can sense it. But real scarcity, real limitations on your time, your availability, your resources, that's not manipulation. That's just reality. And communicating that reality clearly can be a powerful influence tool. Use scarcity honestly. If you genuinely have limited time or resources, say so. I can only take this on if we start by next week is more compelling than whenever works for me. Frame opportunities as unique. Even if what you're offering isn't literally scarce, you can highlight what makes this particular opportunity unique or time-sensitive. This specific window for collaboration, or given where the market is right now. Create legitimate urgency. Instead of artificial deadlines, create real ones. I need to make a decision about resource allocation by Friday, so let's talk before then. Real urgency is compelling without being pushy. The third trigger is social proof, and it might be the most pervasive force shaping human behavior. We are social creatures. We look to others to figure out what's normal, what's valuable, what's worth doing. When we see lots of people making a choice, we unconsciously assume it must be a good choice. This is why restaurants put fake lines outside during slow hours, why websites show how many people have bought a product, why influencers obsess over follower counts. Social proof works. But here's what most people miss. Social proof isn't just about numbers, it's about relevance. Knowing that 1 million people like something is interesting. Knowing that people like you, people you respect, people whose judgment matters to you, like something, that's powerful. I learned this when I was trying to get a skeptical client to try a new approach. I could have told them about the hundreds of companies using this method. Instead, I told them about 3 specific companies in their exact industry, facing their exact challenges, who'd gotten specific results. 3 companies, not hundreds, but the right 3. That's targeted social proof. And it worked. Here's how to use social proof effectively. Quality over quantity. One testimonial from someone your audience respects is worth more than 100 testimonials from strangers. Make it specific. People love this is weak. Sarah from marketing said this cut her workflow time in half is strong. Use peer proof. People are most influenced by people they see as peers, not aspirational figures, not authority figures. People like them. Show the bandwagon forming. More and more teams are adopting this approach, suggests momentum, which creates its own form of social proof. Now, let's talk about something that might make you uncomfortable. Cognitive biases. These are the systematic errors in thinking that affect all of us. They're not character flaws. They're features of how human brains process information. And if you understand them, you can work with them instead of against them. Confirmation bias is probably the most important one for persuasion. This is our tendency to seek out, interpret, and remember information that confirms what we already believe. Here's what this means practically. If you're trying to change someone's mind by attacking their existing beliefs head-on, you're fighting an uphill battle. Their brain is literally wired to reject information that contradicts what they think they know. But if you can frame your message in a way that aligns with their existing beliefs, even while nudging them toward new conclusions, you're working with their cognitive architecture instead of against it. I used this when I was trying to convince a traditional old-school manager to embrace remote work. I didn't argue that his belief in FaceTime was wrong. Instead, I reframed remote work as a way to measure real productivity, rather than just presence, which aligned with his stated value of results over appearances. Same outcome, different frame, way more effective. The anchoring bias is another powerful one. This is our tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information we receive when making decisions. If I tell you a project will cost $10,000 and then say I can do it for $7,000, you feel like you're getting a deal. If I start by saying it costs $7,000, you might negotiate down. The first number anchors your perception of value. This shows up everywhere in persuasion. The first number in a salary negotiation. The first proposal in a discussion. The first expectation set in a conversation. Whoever sets the anchor often sets the terms of the entire discussion. The authority bias makes us more likely to trust and comply with people we perceive as experts or authority figures. This is why doctors can convince patients to take medications with uncomfortable side effects. Why CEOs can inspire organizational changes that seem risky. Why expert endorsements sell products. You don't need to be the world's leading expert to leverage this. You just need to establish credibility in the specific domain relevant to your persuasive goal. Show your expertise, reference your experience, Demonstrate that you know what you're talking about. But here's something crucial. These biases and triggers aren't tools for manipulation. They're tools for communication. When you understand that people have confirmation bias, you don't use that to trick them. You use it to frame your message in a way that's actually receivable. When you understand reciprocity, you don't fake helpfulness. You genuinely help people and understand that it builds relationship capital. The ethical line is simple. Are you using these principles to guide people toward outcomes that are genuinely good for them, or are you using them to exploit people for your own gain? If you're helping people make better decisions, solve real problems, achieve their goals, then using these psychological principles is just effective communication. If you're tricking people into doing things that benefit you at their expense, that's manipulation. Know the difference. Stay on the right side of that line. Let me share a story that illustrates this. I once worked with someone who was brilliant at using psychological triggers. Scarcity, social proof, reciprocity. He deployed them all masterfully. And in the short term, he got incredible results. People said, yes. Deals closed. Things happened. But within 6 months, his reputation was destroyed. Because people figured out that the outcomes he was pushing them toward weren't actually in their best interest. The scarcity was often manufactured. The social proof was cherry-picked. The reciprocity was strategic manipulation, not genuine relationship building. He'd won battles but lost the war. Because influence without integrity is just a fancy word for con artistry. And con artistry has a short shelf life. Compare that to another person I know who's equally skilled with these principles but uses them ethically. She genuinely helps people. She frames things in ways that make them receivable, but she's always pushing toward outcomes that create real value. She uses scarcity honestly. She builds genuine relationships. 20 years later, she's one of the most influential people in her industry. Not because she's the loudest or the pushiest, but because people trust her. They know that when she's trying to persuade them of something, it's worth considering seriously. That's the kind of influence worth building. So, how do you practice using these triggers ethically? Start by observing. Before you try to use these principles, just notice them in action. Watch how they show up in your daily life. Notice when you feel the pull of reciprocity or scarcity or social proof. Understanding how they work on you makes you better at using them with others. Experiment small. Don't wait for high-stakes situations to try these out. Practice in low-pressure conversations. Try framing something with social proof. See how people respond. Try giving value before asking. Notice what happens. Reflect on outcomes. After using these triggers, think about what worked and what didn't. Not just, did I get what I wanted, but did this create a good outcome for everyone involved? Build your skills through intentional practice and honest reflection. Stay ethical. Keep asking yourself, am I using this to help or to exploit? Am I being honest? Would I be okay with someone using this approach on me? If the answers make you uncomfortable, adjust your approach. Here's something I've noticed after years of studying and practicing influence. The most powerful persuaders aren't the ones with the slickest techniques. They're the ones who genuinely understand human psychology. and use that understanding to create better outcomes. They know that people respond to stories better than statistics, so they tell compelling stories that illustrate their points. They know that people need to feel heard before they'll listen, so they invest time in really understanding perspectives before trying to shift them. They know that people make decisions emotionally and justify them logically, so they speak to both heart and mind. This isn't manipulation, it's empathy plus strategy. It's caring enough about outcomes to communicate in ways that actually work with how humans are wired. And here's the beautiful part. When you get good at this, persuasion stops feeling like a struggle. It starts feeling more like a dance. You can sense the rhythm of a conversation, know when to push and when to pull back, feel when someone's receptive and when they need more time. That's not something you can learn from a book alone. It takes practice, it takes attention, it takes being willing to fail and adjust and try again. But every conversation is an opportunity to practice. Every interaction is a chance to refine your understanding of what works. Think about your last few days. How many times did someone try to influence you? How many times did you try to influence someone? Now think about those interactions through the lens of what we've discussed. Can you see the psychological triggers at play? Can you identify the biases being activated? Start there, with awareness, because awareness is the foundation of skill. As you move through your day tomorrow, notice when reciprocity shows up. Notice when scarcity creates urgency. Notice when you rely on a social proof to make decisions. Notice your own cognitive biases kicking in, and then gently start experimenting with using these principles intentionally. Not in a heavy-handed way, just more consciously, more strategically. Help someone without expecting anything back, and notice how it shifts the relationship. Create legitimate scarcity around your time or resources, and notice how it changes how people value you. Share relevant social proof, and notice how it increases receptivity to your ideas. Small experiments, low stakes, high learning. Because here's what I've learned. You don't need to be a master manipulator to be genuinely influential. You just need to understand how influence actually works and be willing to practice using that understanding ethically. The psychological triggers we've talked about, reciprocity, scarcity, social proof, cognitive biases, these aren't secret weapons. They're just accurate maps of human psychology. And when you have accurate maps, you can navigate more effectively. But maps are only useful if you actually use them. If you put this information in a mental file labeled interesting and never apply it, nothing changes. The power comes from application. So here's my challenge to you. Pick one trigger, just one. Maybe it's reciprocity. Maybe it's social proof. Maybe it's being more aware of confirmation bias. Focus on that one trigger for the next week. Notice it. Experiment with it. Reflect on what you learn. Then add another one. Build your influence toolkit piece by piece through practice and observation. Because the goal isn't to memorize a list of psychological principles. The goal is to develop an intuitive understanding of how influence works so that it becomes second nature. And that only happens through doing. In our next section, we're going to talk about something that might be even more powerful than psychological triggers. The actual words you use and how you structure them. We're going to dive into the art of framing, of linguistic persuasion, of how tiny changes in how you say something can create massive changes in how people receive it. But before we go there, take a moment to appreciate something. You now understand human decision-making at a deeper level than most people ever will. You see the invisible forces shaping choices. You recognize the patterns that drive behavior. That's power. Use it wisely. Because with great influence comes great responsibility. And the most influential people I know are the ones who never forget that. Part 3. The language of influence. Here's something that's going to sound obvious at first, but stick with me because it goes deeper than you think. The exact same idea, presented with different words, can get completely different responses. I mean, completely different. Like night and day, different. Let me show you what I'm talking about. A couple months ago, I was at a gym trying to convince a friend to join me for an early morning workout routine. First attempt, I said, "We should work out at 6 a.m. 3 times a week. It'll be good for our health." Response, "Yeah, maybe. Let me think about it." Translation, never going to happen. Second attempt, different friend, different words. What if we became the kind of people who own their mornings? 3 days a week, 6 a.m., we take that time for ourselves before the world makes demands on us. Response, I'm in. When do we start? Same proposal, same time, same activity. But the framing, completely different. And that difference changed everything. The first version was about obligation, about should, about future health benefits that feel abstract and far away. The second version was about identity, about claiming power, about immediate ownership of your day. See what I mean? This is what I call the language of influence. And it's probably the most underutilized tool in most people's persuasion toolkit. Most of us stumble through conversations saying whatever comes to mind, not really thinking about the specific words we're choosing or how we're structuring our sentences. We figure as long as we're getting our point across, that's good enough. But here's the truth. It's not about getting your point across. It's about getting your point across in a way that actually moves people. And that requires being intentional about language. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. This sounds like wordplay, like I'm supposed to become some smooth-talking salesperson using fancy language tricks. Not at all. What I'm talking about is understanding that language shapes perception. The words we choose don't just describe reality, they actually create the reality that people experience in their minds. And when you understand that, when you really get that, you start using language more strategically. Let me break down what I mean by framing. Framing is the art of presenting information in a way that influences how people perceive and interpret it. Think of it like putting a picture in different frames. The picture is the same, but a rustic wooden frame creates one feeling, a sleek modern frame creates another, an ornate gold frame creates yet another. The frame changes how you see what's inside it. That's what you're doing with language. You're choosing the frame through which people will see your ideas. And here's what makes this so powerful. People often don't even realize they're being influenced by the frame. They think they're responding to the idea itself. But really, they're responding to how the idea was presented. Let's talk about one of the most fundamental framing choices: positive versus negative framing. Imagine I'm trying to get you to invest in a new business venture. I could say, this investment has a 70% success rate. Or I could say, this investment has a 30% failure rate. Mathematically, same information. Psychologically, completely different impact. The first frame emphasizes the positive, the success. It makes you think about what you'll gain. The second frame emphasizes the negative, the risk. It makes you think about what you could lose. And here's the fascinating part. People respond differently to these frames even when they consciously know they're saying the same thing. Because we're not purely rational creatures. We're emotional beings who process language at a gut level before our logical brain kicks in. So, which frame should you use? Depends on your audience and your goal. Some people are motivated by gains. They want to hear about what they'll achieve, what they'll gain, what possibilities will open up. For these people, positive framing works better. Other people are motivated by loss avoidance. They want to hear about what they'll protect, what risks they'll avoid, what problems they'll prevent. For these people, negative framing can be more effective. The skill is in reading your audience and adjusting accordingly. I learned this lesson hard when I was trying to get my team to adopt a new project management system. I kept talking about all the cool features, all the things we'd be able to do. Positive framing. And I could not understand why people were dragging their feet. Then someone pulled me aside and said, "Look, we're drowning right now. We don't need more features. We need fewer headaches." Oh, they weren't motivated by gains. They were motivated by pain relief. So I reframed. Instead of talking about what we'd gain, I talked about what we'd eliminate. The dropped balls, the missed deadlines, the confusion about who's doing what. Same system, different frame, and suddenly people couldn't adopt it fast enough. That's the power of framing. But it goes beyond just positive versus negative. Let's talk about perspective framing. You can present the same situation from different viewpoints, and each viewpoint creates a different experience. You'll need to invest $5,000 up front versus for less than the cost of your monthly coffee habit over 3 years, you'll have this skill for life. Same cost, different perspective. The first frames it as a big chunk of money you have to part with. The second frames it as a small daily expense spread over time compared to something you already spend money on without thinking. Or try this. This will require working late for the next 2 weeks. Versus 2 weeks of focused effort now means you'll be ahead for the next 6 months. Same time investment, but the first frame makes it feel like a sacrifice. The second makes it feel like a strategic choice with payoff. See how this works? The frame you choose determines the story people tell themselves about what you're asking them to do. And here's something really important. You're going to frame things one way or another. You can't not frame. Every time you describe something, you're choosing which aspects to highlight, which words to use, which perspective to take. The question is whether you're doing it intentionally or accidentally. Intentional framing means you're thinking strategically about how to present ideas in ways that resonate with your audience. Accidental framing means you're leaving it to chance, hoping your natural word choices happen to land well. I know which one I'd rather do. Now, let's talk about something even more subtle and powerful: embedded commands and language patterns. This is where we get into the real artistry of linguistic persuasion. An embedded command is a suggestion or instruction tucked inside a larger sentence in a way that bypasses conscious resistance. Instead of saying directly, "You should buy this product," which triggers people's natural skepticism, you might say, "A lot of people find that when they try this product, they immediately see the value." The command, "Try this product and see the value," are embedded in a statement about what other people do. It feels like information, not a directive. But your subconscious picks up on those action phrases. Or instead of, "You need to make a decision now," you might say, "As you think through the options and imagine yourself 6 months from now, having already made this decision, what feels right?" The embedded commands are: think through the options, imagine yourself, and make this decision. But they're softened by being wrapped in a question about their own intuition. This isn't manipulation. It's just understanding that people respond better to suggestions that don't feel like demands. We all have resistance to being told what to do. But we're much more open to ideas that we feel like we're coming to on our own. Presuppositions are another powerful language tool. These are assumptions built into the structure of a sentence that people tend to accept without questioning. When you implement this strategy, what results are you most excited about? That sentence presupposes that you will implement the strategy. The question isn't whether you'll do it, but what you're looking forward to when you do. If someone answers the question, they've unconsciously accepted the presupposition. Compare that to, "Are you going to implement this strategy?" That's a yes-no question that invites resistance. The presupposition version moves past the yes-no decision and into implementation details, making the action feel more inevitable. Or try this: "What time works better for you, morning or afternoon?" Presupposes that a meeting will happen. The only question is timing, versus "Do you want to meet?" which invites a no. Now, I want to be really clear about something. These techniques work. They work really well. But they only work ethically if you're using them to guide people toward genuinely good outcomes. If you're using presuppositions to box people into decisions they shouldn't make, that's manipulation. If you're using them to help people move past unnecessary resistance toward things that will actually benefit them, that's persuasive communication. Know the difference. Honor the difference. Let's talk about questions as influence tools. Most people think of questions as ways to gather information, and they are. But questions are also incredibly powerful framing devices. The questions you ask determine what people think about. If I ask you, "What could go wrong with this plan?" I'm directing your attention toward risks and problems. If I ask you, "What could go right with this plan?" I'm directing your attention toward opportunities and benefits. Same plan, different focus, and that focus shapes perception. Leading questions take this even further. They're structured to guide people toward specific conclusions. Don't you think it would be valuable to have this skill? That's harder to say no to than, "Do you think this skill is valuable?" The phrasing suggests the answer. But here's where it gets really interesting. rhetorical questions. These aren't really questions at all. They're statements disguised as questions. And they're incredibly persuasive because they invite people to come to conclusions on their own. If you could transform one area of your life in the next 3 months, wouldn't you want to start now? I'm not telling you to start now. I'm asking a question that makes starting now feel like the obvious answer. What kind of person do you want to be 5 years from now? I'm not lecturing you about personal growth. I'm asking a question that makes you think about it yourself. And conclusions we reach on our own are always more powerful than conclusions someone tells us. I use this all the time in conversations where I'm trying to influence outcomes. Instead of making arguments, I ask questions that lead people to my conclusions. It's not sneaky, it's just effective. Because people trust their own thinking more than they trust mine. Now let's talk about something that might be the most important linguistic tool in your persuasion arsenal: storytelling. Humans are hardwired to respond to stories. We've been sharing stories around fires for hundreds of thousands of years. Our brains light up differently when we hear a story versus when we hear facts and figures. Stories engage emotions. They create empathy. They make abstract concepts concrete. They're memorable in ways that lists of benefits never are. When I want to persuade someone of something important, I don't start with my main argument. I start with a story that illustrates the point I want to make. Let me show you what I mean. I could say, having a morning routine increases productivity and well-being. Or I could say, I used to wake up to my phone alarm, immediately check email, and start my day in reactive mode, responding to other people's priorities before I'd even gotten out of bed. I felt constantly behind, constantly stressed. Then I started protecting the first hour of my day. No phone, just movement, coffee, and intentional thought. Everything changed, not because I was doing more, but because I was showing up differently. Which one is more persuasive? Which one makes you actually feel something? The story, right? Because stories create experience. They don't just tell you something is true. They show you what that truth looks like in real life. Good persuasive stories have a few key elements. They're specific. Not someone I know, but my colleague Marcus. Not a while ago, but last Tuesday. Specificity creates credibility. They're relatable. The person in the story faces a challenge or situation that your audience can see themselves in. They think, that could be me. They have transformation. Something changes. A problem gets solved. A lesson gets learned. A situation improves. Stories without change are just descriptions. They're emotionally resonant. You can feel something when you hear them. Frustration, hope, relief, excitement. Emotion is what makes stories stick. And here's the beautiful thing. You don't need to make up stories. Your life is full of them. Pay attention to your own experiences, to things you've witnessed, to transformations you've seen. Those real stories are your most powerful persuasion tools. I've gotten more buy-in through 3-minute personal stories than through 20-minute presentations full of data. Because data tells you what happened. Stories help you understand why it matters. Let's talk about metaphors and analogies. These are linguistic shortcuts that help people understand new concepts by connecting them to familiar ones. Instead of explaining a complex technical process, you might say, it's like a relay race. Each person does their part and passes the baton to the next person. Instantly, people get it. They understand coordination, handoffs, timing, accountability, all through a simple metaphor. I was once trying to explain to a client why we needed to invest in better systems before scaling. The direct argument wasn't landing. Then I said, right now, we're trying to run a marathon in flip-flops. Could we finish? Maybe. But wouldn't it make more sense to get proper running shoes first? Boom. They got it immediately. The metaphor made the concept concrete and obvious in a way that my logical explanation hadn't. The key to good metaphors is choosing ones that resonate with your specific audience. Sports metaphors work great for some people and fall flat for others. Family metaphors, journey metaphors, building metaphors. Know your audience and choose accordingly. Now, let's talk about something subtle but incredibly important: the power of contrasts. Our brains are wired to think in comparisons. We understand things better when we see them in relation to something else. This approach is efficient, is less compelling than this approach cuts your process time in half compared to what you're doing now. The contrast makes the benefit concrete and measurable. This is a good opportunity is vague. This is the kind of opportunity that comes along once every few years, creates urgency through contrast with scarcity. You can use contrast to make positives seem more positive and negatives seem more negative. Sure, you could keep doing things the old way. It's comfortable. It's familiar. It's also keeping you stuck exactly where you are. The contrast between comfort and being stuck creates tension that motivates change. Here's another linguistic tool I love: strategic vulnerability. Most people think persuasion is about appearing perfect, having all the answers, never showing weakness. But actually, strategic vulnerability, admitting challenges or uncertainties in specific ways, can make you more persuasive. Look, I don't have this all figured out, but here's what I do know. That honesty builds trust. It makes you relatable. It signals that you're not trying to sell someone a fantasy. This won't be easy. It's going to require real effort. But here's why it's worth it. Acknowledging the difficulty up front disarms resistance. People were going to think about the challenges anyway. By bringing them up yourself, you control the frame and demonstrate that you're being straight with them. The key is that the vulnerability has to be genuine and strategic. You're not undermining your own position. You're humanizing it. Let me tell you about a time this worked powerfully for me. I was pitching a consulting engagement to a potential client. My competitor had this slick presentation promising guaranteed results, no risk. Everything would be perfect. I took a different approach. I said, here's the truth. This is going to be uncomfortable. We're going to challenge some sacred cows. Some people on your team might resist. There will be moments where you wonder if this was a good idea. I can't guarantee perfect results because I don't know what we'll uncover when we dig in. What I can guarantee is that I'll be honest with you every step of the way, and we'll figure it out together. They chose me because the vulnerability felt real, and real beats polished when trust is on the line. Now let's talk about pattern interrupts. People develop expectations about how conversations will go. They have scripts in their heads. When you follow the expected script, they can go on autopilot. When you break the pattern, you capture attention. Instead of starting a presentation with, "Thanks for being here today, I'm excited to share," try starting with silence. Let people settle. Let them get curious about why you're not talking, then begin. Instead of responding to an objection with a counterargument, try agreeing with part of it first. "You're absolutely right that this is expensive. Let's talk about whether it's worth it." The pattern interrupt works because it jolts people out of their automatic responses and back into active engagement. I use this in negotiations all the time. When someone expects me to argue over price, I'll sometimes say, "You know what? You're right. This price is high. Let me explain why I think it's actually undervalued at this price." That's not what they expected. So they listen differently. Here's something crucial I've learned about persuasive language. Less is often more. We think we need to pile on. Arguments give people every reason, address every possible objection. But actually, too many words dilute impact. Compare these two. We should move forward with this because it will save time, reduce costs, improve efficiency, increase morale, streamline processes, enhance collaboration, and position us better for future growth. Versus, "This will save us time and money. Everything else is a bonus." The second one hits harder because it's focused. It gives people something clear to grab onto instead of overwhelming them with a list. Clarity beats cleverness. Always. Don't try to sound smart. Try to be understood. The most persuasive language is often the simplest language that gets the point across with power. Short sentences, clear statements, concrete examples. That's what moves people. And here's something about repetition. It works. Not annoying repetition where you say the same thing over and over in the same way, but strategic repetition where you come back to your core message from different angles. The key is consistency. Whether you're building a habit, growing a business, or developing a skill, consistency is what creates results. It's not about being perfect. It's about being consistent. See what I did there? The word consistent appeared 3 times, but each time in a different context. The repetition reinforces the message without being boring. Great speakers do this constantly. They have a central theme, and they keep circling back to it in different ways throughout their talk. By the end, that message is locked in. Let me share something about the power of specificity. Vague language is forgettable. Specific language sticks. "This will help you be more productive" is vague. "This will give you back 2 hours every Tuesday and Thursday" is specific and way more compelling. "We've helped a lot of companies" is vague. "We've helped 47 companies in your industry in the last 18 months" is specific and credible. The more specific you can be without getting bogged down in unnecessary detail, the more persuasive you'll be. Here's my challenge to you. For the next week, pay attention to the specific words you use when you're trying to influence outcomes. Are you using passive or active language? "Mistakes were made" versus "I made a mistake." Are you using weak qualifiers that undermine your message? "I kind of think maybe we should consider" versus "I believe we should." Are you framing things positively or negatively, toward gains or away from losses? Are you using questions to guide thinking? Are you telling stories or just listing facts? Just notice. That's the first step. Awareness. Then start experimenting. Try different frames. See what lands. Pay attention to how small word changes affect responses. Because here's the thing, you're using language anyway. You might as well use it strategically. The words you choose shape the reality people experience. They create frames. They tell stories. They guide attention. They make ideas feel inevitable or impossible, appealing or repellent, urgent or optional. That's power. Use it consciously. In our next section, we're going to talk about something that might be even more powerful than the words you use. The emotions you evoke, and how you connect with people at a level deeper than logic. Because ultimately, people make decisions with their hearts and justify them with their heads. And if you can speak to both, you become unstoppable. Part 4. The Heart of Influence. Let me tell you about the moment I finally understood what persuasion really is. I was at a rooftop bar in Austin, having what I thought was a casual conversation with someone I just met at a conference. We weren't talking about anything particularly important, just life, challenges, what drives us, what scares us. No agenda, no pitch, just two people being real with each other. 3 months later, that person became one of my most valuable business partners. Not because I'd convinced them of anything that night, but because we'd connected, really connected, at a level that went way beyond strategy or technique. And that's when it hit me. All the framing in the world, all the psychological triggers, all the perfect words, they're tools, important tools. But they're not the foundation of real influence. It's emotional connection. Let me explain what I mean. You can have the perfect pitch, the ideal framing, every logical argument lined up. But if people don't feel something when they interact with you, if there's no genuine human connection happening, your influence has a ceiling, a pretty low ceiling. Think about the people who've genuinely changed your mind about important things in your life. I'm willing to bet that most of them weren't just intellectually compelling. They connected with you emotionally. You felt understood by them. You trusted them. You cared what they thought. That's not a coincidence. That's how humans actually work. We make decisions emotionally and justify them logically. We trust people we feel connected to. We're moved by people who move us. And we resist people who feel distant or mechanical, no matter how good their arguments are. This is where emotional intelligence comes in. And I'm not talking about being nice or empathetic in some vague, fuzzy way. I'm talking about a specific set of skills that allow you to read, understand, and work with emotions, both yours and others. Here's what emotional intelligence looks like in practice. You can recognize what someone is feeling even when they're not saying it directly. You pick up on the tension in their voice, the slight change in their posture, the pause before they answer. You see beyond the words to the emotion underneath. You can name and understand your own emotions. You know the difference between being frustrated and being overwhelmed, between being anxious and being excited. This self-awareness helps you manage your emotional state so it supports your goals instead of undermining them. You can regulate your emotional responses. When someone says something that triggers defensiveness, you can pause, notice that feeling, and choose how to respond instead of reacting automatically. You can create emotional states in others through your own energy and presence. When you show up calm and confident, others tend to feel more at ease. When you bring enthusiasm, it's contagious. And most importantly for persuasion, you can empathize with others in a way that creates genuine connection. Let's dig into that last one because it's crucial. Empathy is not the same as sympathy. Sympathy is feeling bad for someone. Empathy is feeling with them. It's the ability to step into their emotional experience and understand what they're going through from the inside. When you truly empathize with someone, they feel it. They feel seen, heard, understood. And that feeling is incredibly powerful. Here's what most people get wrong about empathy and persuasion. They fake it. They use empathy as a technique, saying things like, "I understand how you feel," without actually understanding, and people can tell. They can always tell. Real empathy requires actually caring about understanding someone's perspective. It requires curiosity. It requires being willing to see the world through their eyes, even if their view is very different from yours. I learned this lesson hard during a conflict with a team member a few years back. We were butting heads on everything. I kept trying to convince him my way was better, getting frustrated when he wouldn't budge. Then I stopped trying to convince him and just asked, "Help me understand what you're worried about here. What am I missing?" And I actually listened, really listened, not to find holes in his argument, but to genuinely understand his concerns. Turns out, he wasn't being stubborn. He was carrying context I didn't have. He'd seen similar initiatives fail before in ways I couldn't have known about. His resistance wasn't irrational. It was informed by experience I hadn't taken the time to understand. Once I got that, once I really empathized with where he was coming from, the whole dynamic shifted. We found a solution that addressed his concerns while still moving forward. And our working relationship transformed because he felt genuinely heard. That's the power of real empathy. But here's something fascinating. Empathy doesn't mean you have to agree with someone. You can fully understand their perspective and still hold a different view. The magic is that when people feel understood, they become way more open to understanding you in return. Empathy creates reciprocity at an emotional level. Now, let's talk about something that might seem counterintuitive: emotional contagion. This is the phenomenon where emotions spread from person to person. If I'm anxious, you start feeling anxious. If I'm excited, you catch some of that excitement. It happens automatically, unconsciously, constantly. And as a persuader, you can use this intentionally. Before an important conversation, I pay close attention to my own emotional state. If I'm trying to inspire confidence but I'm feeling uncertain, that uncertainty will leak through no matter what words I use. People will sense it and mirror it back. So I do the internal work first. I get myself into the emotional state that I want to create in others. If I want them to feel excited, I connect with my own genuine excitement about the idea. If I want them to feel calm and grounded, I settle myself first. This isn't about faking emotions. It's about being intentional about which emotions you're bringing to the table. I remember prepping for a pitch to potential investors. I was nervous, caught up in what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. I could feel that energy, and I knew that if I walked into that room carrying it, they'd pick up on it. So I took 20 minutes to shift my state. I reminded myself why I was genuinely excited about this project. I visualized the conversation going well. I got my body into a confident posture, not fake confidence, real confidence that I connected with by changing my focus and my physiology. The pitch went great, not because my nerves disappeared, but because I'd shifted the dominant emotion I was broadcasting from anxiety to genuine enthusiasm. Your emotional state is contagious. Choose it wisely. Let's talk about emotional validation, because this might be one of the most underused influence tools out there. Validation means acknowledging someone's emotional experience as real and understandable, even if you don't necessarily agree with their conclusions. I can see why you'd feel frustrated about that. That sounds really overwhelming. It makes total sense that you'd be excited about this possibility. Notice what validation doesn't do. It doesn't agree or disagree with someone's position. It simply acknowledges their emotional reality. And here's why this is so powerful for persuasion. People can't move past emotions they don't feel are acknowledged. If someone's afraid and you dismiss that fear, they're not going to suddenly stop being afraid. They're just going to stop trusting you. But if you validate the fear, if you show that you take it seriously, they can actually process it and move forward. I use this constantly in conversations where I'm trying to overcome resistance. Someone says, "I don't think this is going to work." Instead of jumping to, "Yes, it will, let me explain why," I start with, "I hear you. You're seeing real risks here. Tell me more about what specifically concerns you." Validation first, then exploration, then eventually persuasion. This approach disarms defensiveness. It creates space for genuine dialogue, and it builds trust in a way that counterarguments never can. Now let's talk about something that brings all of this together: storytelling at an emotional level. Earlier, we talked about storytelling as a linguistic tool. But the real power of stories isn't just in their structure, it's in their emotional resonance. The stories that move people, that change minds, that inspire action, they all have one thing in common. They make you feel something. Think about the most memorable speech you've ever heard, or the conversation that changed your perspective on something important. I'm willing to bet it wasn't just information being transferred. It was emotion being shared. When I want to persuade someone of something really important, I don't start with data. I start with a story that creates an emotional experience. Let me give you an example. I was trying to get buy-in for investing in mental health resources for our team. I could have presented statistics about productivity and retention, and I did, eventually. But I started with a story about a talented person on our team who'd been struggling silently, about the moment they finally felt safe enough to ask for help, about the difference it made when they got support, about how that one person's transformation rippled out to affect the whole team. By the time I got to the numbers, people weren't just thinking about ROI. They were thinking about real human beings they cared about. The decision became obvious. Good emotional storytelling does a few key things. It creates identification. The audience sees themselves or people they care about in the story. It's not about someone distant and abstract. It's about someone relatable. It builds tension. Something is at stake. There's a problem, a challenge, a conflict. This creates emotional investment. We want to know what happens. It offers resolution. The tension resolves in a way that illustrates your point. But the resolution feels earned, not forced. It leaves people feeling something specific that supports your persuasive goal. Hope, urgency, possibility, concern, whatever emotion serves the outcome you're working toward. And here's the crucial part. The best persuasive stories are true. Real stories from real life have an authenticity that made-up examples can never match. Your life is full of persuasive stories. Pay attention to them. Collect them. Use them. Now, let's shift gears and talk about something that might seem like a different topic, but is actually deeply connected. Building alliances. Because here's the truth. The most powerful form of influence isn't one-to-one persuasion. It's creating networks of people who amplify your influence. Think about how ideas actually spread. Rarely does one person convince everyone individually. Instead, key influencers adopt the idea, and it spreads through their networks. Early adopters become advocates. Momentum builds. Social proof compounds. This is where understanding social dynamics becomes crucial. Every social network, whether it's a company, a community, or a friend group, has certain people who hold disproportionate influence. Not necessarily the loudest people, not always the people with formal authority, but the people others trust, look to, respect. These are your key influencers, and if you can get them on board with your ideas, they become multipliers of your persuasive power. I learned this when I was trying to implement a major change in an organization. I spent weeks trying to convince everyone through logical arguments and formal presentations. Progress was slow and frustrating. Then I shifted strategy. I identified the 3 people in the organization who others naturally looked to for guidance. Not the executives, just people who'd earned credibility and trust over time. I spent time with each of them individually, listened to their concerns, addressed their questions, got them genuinely excited about the change, didn't ask them to advocate for it, just made sure they understood it and felt good about it. 2 weeks later, the change started spreading organically because those key influencers, in their natural interactions with others, shared their enthusiasm. People who'd been resistant when I presented the idea were suddenly open to it when someone they trusted mentioned it casually. That's leverage. That's smart influence. So how do you build these alliances? First, you identify the real influencers, not just the people with titles, but the people with trust. Watch who people go to for advice. Notice whose opinions shift conversations. Pay attention to who has credibility on the specific topic you care about. Second, you invest in genuine relationships with these people, not transactional networking, real connection. Find common ground. Add value to their work. Show genuine interest in their perspectives. Third, you bring them in early. Don't wait until you have a fully formed plan and then try to sell them on it. Involve them in the thinking process. Ask for their input. Make them feel like co-creators rather than targets of persuasion. Fourth, you respect their influence. Don't try to manipulate them or use them as tools. Recognize that they've earned their credibility and treat them accordingly. Give them credit. Honor their concerns. Build real alliance, not just strategic advantage. I've seen people try to use influencers as pawns in their persuasive games. It never works. People can tell when they're being used, and it destroys exactly the trust you were trying to leverage. But when you build genuine alliances with key influencers, when you create authentic relationships based on mutual respect and shared goals, the multiplication effect is incredible. Now let's talk about social proof from a different angle. We covered this as a psychological trigger earlier, but I want to talk about how you create it, not just use it. Social proof builds over time through visible momentum. When you're trying to create change or build support for an idea, one of the most powerful things you can do is make early wins visible. Got 3 people on board? Talk about those 3. Achieved a small success? Share it. Building a case study? Document it publicly. Each visible win makes the next win easier. Because people want to be part of what's working. They want to join the movement that has momentum. I've used this in launching new initiatives countless times. I don't wait until everyone's on board to start talking about it. I celebrate early adopters. I share quick wins. I create the perception accurately that something is happening here. And that perception attracts more people, which creates more momentum, which attracts more people. It's a virtuous cycle. But here's the key. The social proof has to be real. Fake momentum is obvious, and it kills credibility. But real, honest, visible progress, that's magnetic. Let's talk about something that often gets overlooked in discussions of persuasion, making it stick. You can convince someone in the moment, get them excited, get them to agree. But if that commitment doesn't translate into sustained action, did you really influence anything? This is where understanding consistency and commitment becomes crucial. People have a deep psychological need to be consistent with their past actions and statements. Once we've committed to something, especially publicly, we feel pressure to follow through. You can use this understanding to help people lock in their decisions. First, get public commitment when possible. So just to confirm, you're saying you'll have this done by Friday? Said out loud, preferably with others present. Commitments become harder to back out of. Second, get written commitment. Great. Shoot me a quick email confirming that plan. The act of writing it down increases psychological investment. Third, get early action. What's one thing you could do today to get started? Getting someone to take even a tiny first step creates momentum and commitment. Fourth, connect the commitment to identity. This is exactly the kind of bold move that fits who you are as a leader. When commitments align with someone's self-concept, they're much stickier. I learned the power of this when I was trying to get a colleague to adopt a new approach to client relationships. In the meeting, he was enthusiastic, said it made total sense, agreed to implement it. 2 weeks later, nothing had changed. The next time I had a similar conversation with someone else, I added one step. After getting agreement, I said, "Awesome. So here's what I'm hearing. You're going to start doing X with your next 3 clients, starting this week. Can you send me a quick message when you've done it with the first one, just so I know how it goes?" That person followed through, because the commitment became concrete, public, and trackable. Small changes in how you secure commitment can dramatically affect follow-through. Now let's talk about something that might be the most important long-term influence skill: building trust over time. Quick persuasive wins are great, but sustained influence, the kind where people consistently listen to you, value your input, and act on your suggestions, that comes from accumulated trust. And trust isn't built through grand gestures. It's built through consistent small actions over time. Showing up when you say you will, doing what you commit to, being honest even when it's uncomfortable, admitting when you're wrong, giving credit where it's due, keeping confidences, following through on details. These aren't flashy influence tactics. They're character demonstrations. And over time, they build a reputation that makes persuasion almost effortless. I know people who can get meetings with almost anyone, whose ideas are taken seriously by default, who can move groups with a few words. Not because they're master manipulators, but because they've spent years building trust through integrity and consistency. That's the kind of influence worth building toward. Here's something I want you to really think about. What's your long-term influence strategy? Not just, how do I win this conversation, but how do I build the kind of credibility and trust that makes influence sustainable? Because here's the reality. You can be tactically brilliant at persuasion and still struggle if people don't fundamentally trust you. But if you build real trust, if you become known as someone who operates with integrity, who genuinely cares about creating value, who can be counted on, the tactics become almost secondary. People want to be influenced by people they trust. They want to say yes to people who've proven themselves. They want to follow people who've earned credibility. Be that person. Let me share something about the relationship between emotion and logic in persuasion. I used to think they were separate things. Emotional appeals for some situations, logical arguments for others. But I've learned that the most powerful persuasion integrates both seamlessly. You lead with emotion to create openness and connection. Then you use logic to justify and reinforce the emotional decision. Think about any major purchase you've made. You probably felt something first. Excitement about the possibility, desire for what it would give you, fear of missing out. Then you use logic to convince yourself it made sense. You found rational reasons to support what you'd already decided emotionally. Great persuaders understand this sequence and work with it intentionally. They create emotional resonance first, through stories, through empathy, through connection. Then they provide the logical scaffolding that allows people to feel good about acting on those emotions. I do this in every important persuasive conversation. I start by connecting emotionally, making sure they feel heard, creating resonance around shared values or challenges. Then, once that emotional foundation is there, I bring in the logic, the data, the rational arguments. The logic lands so much better because the emotional ground has been prepared. But if you lead with logic before establishing emotional connection, you're asking people to engage their rational mind while their emotional mind is closed. It rarely works. Let me give you a framework for bringing all of this together. The influence loop. Step 1. Connect emotionally. Start by establishing genuine human connection. Show empathy. Find common ground. Create safety and openness. Step 2. Understand deeply. Before you try to influence, understand. Ask questions. Listen actively. Get clear on what really matters to this person. Step 3. Frame strategically. Based on that understanding, frame your message in a way that resonates with their values, addresses their concerns, and speaks to their emotional drivers. Step 4. Support with logic. Provide the rational backing that allows them to feel confident in the decision their emotions are already leaning toward. Step 5. Secure commitment. Get clear, ideally public, commitment that creates accountability and follow-through. Step 6. Build long-term trust. Follow through on your commitments. Be consistent. Demonstrate integrity. Build the relationship beyond this single interaction. This isn't a one-time process. It's a loop. Each successful influence interaction builds trust that makes the next one easier. Over time, you build influence that compounds. Here's my challenge to you as we wrap up. Pick one relationship where you want to build greater influence. Maybe it's a colleague who you often butt heads with. Maybe it's a client you want to work more closely with. Maybe it's a family member where communication feels stuck. Apply what we've talked about. Start with genuine emotional connection. Practice real empathy. Pay attention to your emotional state and how it's affecting the dynamic. Look for opportunities to validate their experience. Tell stories that create emotional resonance. Build trust through small, consistent actions. Don't try to change everything at once. Just focus on connecting more genuinely, understanding more deeply, and building trust more intentionally. Watch what happens. Because here's what I've learned after years of studying and practicing influence. The most powerful form of persuasion doesn't feel like persuasion at all. When you're genuinely connected with someone, when you deeply understand their perspective, when they trust you implicitly, influence becomes natural. It's just two people navigating toward aligned outcomes together. That's the goal. Not to become some master manipulator who can get anyone to do anything, but to become someone who builds genuine relationships, creates real value, and guides conversations toward outcomes that benefit everyone involved. Influence with integrity, persuade with purpose, build trust that lasts. Because at the end of the day, the most influential people aren't the ones with the slickest techniques. They're the ones who genuinely care about the people they're influencing and the outcomes they're creating. Be that person. The world has enough manipulation. What it needs is more people who understand influence deeply enough to use it ethically, who care enough to use it wisely, and who have the skills to use it effectively. You can be that kind of influencer. You have everything you need: the psychological understanding, the linguistic tools, the emotional intelligence, the strategic awareness. Now it's just about practice, about application, about taking everything we've talked about and testing it in real conversations, about failing, learning, adjusting, improving. Every conversation is practice. Every interaction is an opportunity to refine your skills. Every relationship is a chance to build influence that matters. So go practice. Connect genuinely. Understand deeply. Frame strategically. Build trust consistently. And watch how your ability to create positive change in the world expands. Because that's what real influence is about. Not getting what you want at others' expense, but creating outcomes that move everyone forward. That's the kind of persuasion mastery worth developing. That's the kind of influence that changes lives, including your own.